Regardless of where they might lie in the English football pyramid, Leeds United are a big football club. This is the objective truth no matter your club allegiances in the year of 2024. Rewind 70 years, they were nothing. They weren't even as good as Huddersfield Town, and even Bradford City had won an FA Cup, and that's in their West Yorkshire boundaries. Then Don Revie turned up. This is the birth of Leeds. Leeds is slow on the uptake, from the fact that they are still the biggest city in Europe not to have a tram system, to the fact that football took a long time to pitch up and be a big deal. Let's start with the start. Boxing Day 1877, when football was first officially played in Leeds, with two teams from Sheffield strictly playing in an exhibition. Teams from Hunslet tried to get off the ground but didn't. Leeds City was formed in 1904 and moved to a ground called Elland Road, and could even boast Herbert Chapman as a manager in their formative years. By 1919 they were no more. Charlie Copeland blackmailed the club that he'd go to the FA to reveal that they had made illegal payments to players during the war. When they gave him a free transfer to Coventry, he just went and did it anyway. They would be expelled from the league that autumn. 2 weeks after all Leeds City players were auctioned off, Leeds United were formed and took City's reserve spot in the Midland League and took over Elland Road, amid rumours of a merger between Huddersfield Town and Leeds United. 5 years later, Leeds were promoted for the first time and retained a status as a yo-yo club under the management of a lad called Dick Ray. Division 1 stability gave way for the onset of who else but World War II, and when sport returned, Leeds' momentum nosedived. Relegated in 1947, Sam Bolton was announced as chairman the following year, and one of the best moves he made was to introduce Harry Reynolds to the club, ultimately his successor in 1961. In the meantime, the early 1950s had seen talent such as Jack Charlton and John Charles edge Leeds closer and closer to Division 1, before promotion was finally sealed in '56. Just when you thought Leeds United would make a spark, the West Stand caught fire, which plunged Leeds into financial uncertainty, leaving the sale of their prized asset John Charles to Juventus the following year a financial imperative. Bill Lambton was the man tasked with taking Leeds United back. Fair enough if you don't know him, even if you're a Leeds fan. He was promoted temporarily to manage the club and would last just 33 matches, but he arguably carried out the most important pieces of club business. First, he reenacted the policy from his predecessor, Major Frank Buckley, in reviving the youth development system. Then in November 1958, he signed a certain Don Revie. What now? But before we answer that, I need to tell you about how I watch every single Premier League match completely legally, which means it's VPN time! A VPN hides your IP address, which lets you safeguard your internet connection. So, the absolute opposite of what the Manchester United defence would do. Am I right? No? Okay. And for those who haven't skipped this YouTube advert because you bloody love a bargain, here's why you should choose private internet access, today's video sponsor. 1. They're offering you an insane 83% VPN discounts and 4, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4 months completely free. See it like Manchester City buying City Group players for a knockdown price. 2, you can protect an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. Chelsea's transfer strategy for 1. You want 783 devices protected, just buy them all up and protect them. 3, you can access region-restricted content from all over the world 365 days a year. Good news for Spurs fans whose passports are usually back in that cupboard by December. That is private internet access. Links to the discount in the description. Don Revie's playing career was postponed because of the Second World War, like many of his contemporaries, because that's what the word contemporary means. He would become the celebrated, tactically innovative player who won the FA Cup in 1956 and won the Footballer of the Year award during his time playing up front with Manchester City, but it could have gone so differently. If he listened to the doctor, who told him he'd never play again after breaking his ankle in 3 places, mere weeks into his professional career, so much would have been different about life in general. He'd find inspiration from Hungary when they pitched up at Wembley in 1953 and taught England a footballing lesson. In taking a little from Nandor Hidaguti, the Revie plan was using him as a withdrawn forward. As aforementioned, it took him 2 years to find great success, lifting the FA Cup trophy in a match more famous for their goalkeeper breaking his own neck. Fast forward to the November of 1958, and Revie made his playing debut for Leeds United at Elland Road against Newcastle. Within 6 weeks he was named club captain, but in his first full season couldn't stop the club sinking to the 2nd division. He could, however, do something about their return. In the business end of their first season back in the 2nd division, Don Revie was starting to ponder life after playing. He wasn't getting any younger, nobody is, because of how time works for humans, and when Bournemouth advertised their need for a new manager, Revie contemplated applying for the post. He asked new chairman Harry Reynolds for advice, and his advice was, become our manager instead. Jack Taylor had hardly set Leeds aflame as their manager and was freshly sacked, with the club being the dictionary definition of languishing. Revie took the post on and took on both Sid Owen and Les Cocker to assist with the coaching. Aesthetically, the new manager made his mark and simultaneously signalled his intent by dressing up Leeds United all in white. They looked like Real Madrid, but they played more like Male Madrid. An inconsistent 1961-62 season gave way for an utterly disastrous run of results in the second half of the season, which prompted the soul-searching of Revie to end his playing career. A 2-1 loss to Huddersfield on March 3, 1962 was the last time he stepped over the white line in the white kit. Revie's inside right shirt went to the new signing Bobby Collins, who was supposed to be drinking in Last Chance Saloon in his career. It would prove anything but. The Huddersfield defeat was Leeds' second to last, but with 11 matches to go, don't go thinking that it meant they powered through until the end of the season. Home wins against Swansea, Luton and Middlesbrough kept Leeds in the drop zone with 6 games remaining, and then they proceeded to inch forward. A draw at Preston left them safe on goal average, a draw at Walsall had them a point ahead, a point at Bury now 2 points ahead. A point at home to Derby was matched by Brighton, but another point at home to Bury left Leeds in need of a result on the final day. It left a trip to St James's Park as the most important game in Leeds United history. Meanwhile, their relegation rivals Bristol Rovers and Brighton both travelled on the final day, and Swansea hosted Liverpool. Swansea slipped 4 past their opponents, whilst Leeds reserved their 3rd away win of the league season in a 3-goal triumph on the Tyne. Both survived to tell the tale. Given another chance, it gave Revie a chance to look at a squad. It reads like a who's who of Leeds United history, almost all of which Leeds can boast came from the academy, thanks to their new youth recruitment drive. Their first victory on this front was Jack Charlton, whose early Leeds career flitted from one abrasive decision to another. That is until Don Revie made him realise his quality by telling him he could win an England cap. He was right, and Charlton filled the void left behind by John Charles. Billy Bremner was pointed in the direction of England by his father, wishing for him to avoid the sectarianism of the old firm. When Leeds came calling, he was urged to answer. He'd strike up a great partnership on the pitch with Don Revie, which evolved into a blossoming relationship with the coach as the 1960s raged on. Norman Hunter was spotted playing for Birtley Juniors and was told by Revie's predecessor that he would never become a professional. Revie, however, nurtured him and his homesickness with a potential contract and thrust him into the starting 11. Gary Sprake felt the same when he was abruptly handed the number 1 jersey from a young age, diverted from a reserve game in March 1962 to play Southampton in a Division 2 fixture. He'd be the starting goalkeeper by the end of the following season. Willie Bell was the only member that couldn't be said to have come through the Leeds ranks, having signed from Queen's Park in 1960, but he would become the permanent left-back for 7 years and drew acclaim from Jairzinho, of all players. Paul Reaney alternatively was signed as an apprentice the following year after being spotted playing for Middleton Parkside Juniors, Peter Lorimer too from a very early age after playing for Stobswell School in Dundee. Lorimer had become a nationwide sensation and chose Leeds' £800 signing-on fee instead of the thousands thrown at him by Manchester United. Eddie Gray was signed in 1963 after representing Glasgow schools and would be followed by brother Thranke, and both would become far more relevant in tomorrow's episode. The older Gray was brought on as an amateur because Leeds had been so prolific in their youth recruitment that they had used up all of their apprentice quota. He would be joined by Terry Cooper, a local lad from just outside Castlefield, whilst Paul Madeley and Jimmy Greenough were both coming through the system as well. Leeds began the 1962-63 season ballooned with an insufferable amount of hubris, feeling confident enough to bring back the aged John Charles from Juventus for a record £53,000. He lasted 11 matches before returning to Roma amidst an entire transfer scandal where Leeds had to chase Roma for the transfer money for an elongated time. Regardless, Leeds somehow turned a profit. Billy Bremner found his wide partner in Bobby Collins and they dovetailed perfectly, just as Revie had done with Bremner previously. 5'4" and 32 years of age, Collins had no right to be playing so well, but he was just about the most influential player in Revie's early years. Not all was so well, however. Leeds spunked £135,000 on Jim Storey, which helped to spiral the club's debt to over £200,000. It left the club bereft of ideas to recoup the money and they went for the lazy option, hike up them ticket prices for the peasants, proving that price gouging was not entirely a new phenomenon. As a result, the first home game against Rotherham United drew just 14,000 when they'd got 21,482 for their last home game of the prior season. Needless to say, the hierarchy backpedaled and 28,000 went through the door for the September match against Bury. The man who helped cause all that debt, Storey, helped himself and the club massively by smashing in 27 goals. Nobody had scored more for Leeds in a single season since John Charles in his pomp in 1956-57. Leeds got the addition of Storey, but they had the subtraction of Eric Smith, who broke his leg against Chelsea in mid-September, which ultimately ended his Elland Road career. The club was changing fast. The week prior they visited Swansea Town and Revie took the likes of Hunter, Reaney, Sprake and Rod Johnson down, presumably to give them a taste of travelling with the first team, only to spring it on them 90 minutes before kick-off that they would all be starting. Leeds won 2-0. By the end of the month, Peter Lorimer was handed his debut as a 15-year-old against Southampton. Only in for Bremner, Lorimer would have to wait for his full-time opportunity, even more so when he broke his leg in a reserve cup game against Sheffield United. A fifth-place finish revealed the truth of an inconsistent start, whilst their strong end to 1962 was curtailed by one of the coldest winters in history, known as the Big Freeze. Leeds didn't play a football match between December the 22nd and March the 2nd. Yet still they were on the cusp of promotion until they wilted with defeats against Middlesbrough, Huddersfield and Southampton. The momentum was there though. Momentum that only sped up when Johnny Giles swapped FA Cup holders Manchester United for Division 1 wannabes Leeds. Giles was deeply unhappy with manager Matt Busby over his positioning on the wing whilst he was truly a midfielder. Their loss was Leeds' gain as he snuck over the Pennines. The club lost only one league match before Christmas, away at Main Road in September, before the same club put them out of the League Cup. However, a win over local rivals Huddersfield in October put them top, and Leeds wouldn't look back. A further boost was that rare thing of generosity from on high, when club directors covered the club's £84,000 overdraft and took the club out of debt. It took a replay for the reigning English champions Everton to dispatch of them in the FA Cup, which was an indicator that Leeds were ready to go up once and for all. The only downer was the reputation that the club was perceived to have. Front and centre to the bad boy culture was Billy Bremner, who was given a formal warning by the FA. Leeds were further dunked into the hot water after their home tie against Cardiff, where Les Cocker was alleged to have elbowed one of the Cardiff players in the ribs. 4 days later, happier news was on the horizon, and it was the signing that would push Leeds over the line and into the First Division. Alan Peacock had been signed from Middlesbrough for £50,000. Leeds were in that last promotion place ahead of Preston with 14 matches to go, and the suspension that was coming Bremner's way was finally handed down to him. A ludicrous 3 matches that led directly into a trip to Deepdale in early March, which resulted in a Preston win. Revie's side simply shook that off, defeating Southampton and Middlesbrough before finishing the season undefeated. They were helped along with an Easter double over Newcastle United, and a point was needed away at Swansea Town, and Leeds grabbed both thanks to 2 goals from Peacock. An away win at Charlton on the final day sealed the championship as Leeds broke all kinds of records. Nobody had gone up with so many points since Tottenham in 1920. Nobody had gone up having conceded so little since Birmingham in 1948. 30,000 were cramming into Elland Road every other Saturday, and the groundwork was officially done. Don Revie had matured as a coach, and his young players were in the process of doing the same, now with the carrot of First Division football in their short-term futures. The prep began instantaneously when Leeds toured East Germany post-season before heading to Northern Ireland upon their return to pre-season. Whilst over the Irish Sea, the FA formally reported that Leeds United were being monitored for disciplinary reasons. Now under the Division 1 microscope, the tag of Dirty Leeds could be created, and that maturity the players needed to lean on needed to be achieved in double quick time, no matter how unfair the tag might be. August was perfect in eradicating nerves, dispatching of Aston Villa, Liverpool and Wolves, but come September, Liverpool would get quickfire revenge as Leeds also disappointed against Blackpool, Chelsea, Nottingham Forest and Fulham before the ultimate hammer blow. Don Revie was being courted by Sunderland, a supremely successful club of the past, close to Revie's home, and they were in for the Leeds manager. At exactly the same time as Revie was attempting to haggle his own contract at Leeds from 3 years to 5 years with the club's directors. Thankfully for all involved, he got the chairman on side and he would be granted 5 more years at the club. League form picked up in the autumn as a result, despite an early League Cup exit to Aston Villa, but they'd have much more joy in the FA Cup. They ought to have been lauded by keeping up the pace alongside Manchester United in the league, but then came the game known as the Battle of Goodison in November, which further tarnished reputations. 1-0 winners, that part is much forgotten about Leeds' trip to face Everton. Sandy Brown was sent off for the Toffees after landing a sharp left hook on Johnny Giles, whilst the officials were pelted by coins and debris. Enough so that the match would be suspended. The referees thought the best idea was to leave the supporters to stew on their bad behaviour, but obviously it only served to wind them up further. They returned into a more bubbling cauldron, and the referees simply got on with the match in a much more tempestuous atmosphere. All it did was accentuate the idea of dirty Leeds, despite Everton committing almost double the amount of fouls, and it gave Everton the idea to court Revie as their new manager as well. Revie, of course, would rebuff such a manic idea as Leeds kept the 4-point gap to Manchester United through the halfway mark of the season and even closed the gap in advance of 1965. Central to the campaign was Leeds' magnificent and foggy December win at Old Trafford, which tightened up the title race even further, allowing the third wheel of Chelsea to close in on what was shaping up to be a battle for the ages. After 25 matches, the Uniteds of Manchester and Leeds could not be split, whilst Chelsea sat 2 points back with a game in hand, with an identical goal average to Man United. Whilst Leeds snuck ahead of both clubs in January, Chelsea overtook them in February given their games in hand, with 11 matches remaining. In the meantime of February, Leeds had dispatched of Southport, Shrewsbury and Everton in the FA Cup, the latter after 2 much better behaved games. March marked the trip to Selhurst Park and Crystal Palace in the quarter-final of the Cup, but it also marked the return of Alan Peacock from injury. Naturally, the forward bagged twice, leaving Leeds on the precipice of a trip to Wembley. The only team standing in their way, none other than title rivals Manchester United. Unfortunately, the first game was ruined by an erratic referee in a goalless draw at Hillsborough before the biggest success in Leeds history yet. Billy Bremner bundling in a late winner at the City Ground in a much more fluid encounter, which Revie labelled as his proudest moment yet. However, in picking up his fourth booking of the season in the replay, Billy Bremner would be suspended for 7 days, which ensured he'd miss a trip to the Hawthorns as well as the crucial visit of Manchester United, which was a title showdown by this point. April began with the three teams split by 2 points, only with Leeds now holding that game in hand, as they're filling in a Chelsea-Manchester United sandwich. All teams picked up the points on April the 3rd, whilst Leeds topped the table 2 days later, victorious in their game in hand at home to Stoke on the same day that Chelsea lifted the League Cup. Chelsea's hangover extended to a loss at Upton Park, whilst both Leeds and Man United claimed crucial victories. Sooner or later, Easter was on the doorstep as Chelsea thrashed Liverpool on Good Friday to keep the pressure up, only to throw away all that good work with a draw at home to West Brom the very next day. That day it was time for the biggest match of the season when Man United turned up at Elland Road. John Connolly scored the winner, curtailing Leeds' 25-match unbeaten streak, and yet still Leeds had the title in their hands, a point back on Chelsea with a game in hand, the same position as Man United but with a better goal average. 2 days later, the loss of Billy Bremner told at Hillsborough, Sheffield Wednesday running in 3 goals without reply as Manchester United went top of the table with a 4-2 win at Birmingham City. Leeds grabbed themselves some revenge over the Owls the very next day as they topped the table, albeit a point ahead of Man United, who had that crucial game in hand. Another trip to Sheffield was successful 4 days on as Chelsea were officially out of the title race when they got slapped for 6 by Burnley at Turf Moor. Unfortunately for Leeds, Liverpool couldn't do themselves the same favour as they went down by 3 at Old Trafford. And so to April 26th in what was Leeds' final game of the season at St Andrews to play Birmingham, whilst Man United hosted Arsenal, a day in which the title could be sealed. A nervy Leeds found themselves behind on more than one occasion, but Jack Charlton salvaged a late goal for the Whites. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough, as a 3-3 draw combined with Manchester United's 3-1 win over Arsenal left the title all but heading to Old Trafford. Leeds needed Aston Villa to beat the Reds by 19 goals. Of course they didn't, only winning by 1. Still, an incredible achievement to finish second in their first season back. Furthermore, they recorded 4 more points than what it took Liverpool to win the title the prior season, and had the distinction of earning the most points ever for a second place team, which, of course, was little consolation. But what wasn't consolation was Leeds' first trip to Wembley to meet Liverpool in the FA Cup final. Again, nerves got the better of Leeds as a stodgy, goalless 90 minutes lapsed into a manic extra time period that saw Liverpool bag instantly through Roger Hunt. Leeds being Leeds, they had to make it interesting, and Billy Bremner's 100th minute equaliser was salvation for only 17 minutes when Ian St John scored the winner of a tight final late on in the day. And with that, Leeds United were officially created as a big football club. The work before the work had previously been done by the likes of Bill Lambton and, before him, Major Frank Buckley, when they enacted the youth policy that would go on to serve Don Revie so faithfully in the 1960s and early 70s. Revie was handed a tight-knit coaching unit to boot, and the manager owed a lot in the early days to Bobby Collins, who proved to be one of the most important transfers in club history. His experience and quality allowed for the abundance of youth to mesh with the team. In essence, Collins was Don Revie's successor on the inside right, both in his partnership with Bremner and in his role as the team's guiding voice. Ultimately, the peak years of Leeds United would have to be without Collins, who broke his leg in Leeds' first ever European tie against Torino in September 1965. Appearing in Europe from where they were marooned in the lower reaches of the second division has its springboard on 4 things: Don Revie's appointment, Bobby Collins' signing, the realisation from Revie that he had to retire as a player, and the club's subsequent survival on the final day of the 1961-62 season. You can also count the prudence of cutting their losses or making a profit, as it were, by selling John Charles on what would have been an otherwise overindulgent return. Also see the rarest of generosities by the board to prop up the club financially when they were saddled with thousands upon thousands of debt. Signings were few and far between, but for Revie almost all of them worked. Alan Peacock was the one who inched Leeds back over the line and back into the top flight, which neared the inevitability that Don Revie's Leeds would be great. The man himself believed that he had fostered the success to come on three things: team spirit, family spirit and team psychology. His legacy would be completed in the coming years, and to find out about that, the glory years of Leeds United from 1965 to 1974, you'll have to return to the channel tomorrow. But if you can't wait for that content, take a look at the two videos we've started this issue with on Ipswich Town, of their 1962 championship winning squad under Alf Ramsey and of the European days under Bobby Robson.